Hello and welcome to First GEELLE Internacional. This is the second talk of the day 2. We are very glad to have you all participating with us. My name is Michele Gomes Avelar. I am PhD student at USP and a teacher at UFPB. Please, if you are not following our channel, click to subscribe. To stay up to date with our videos, click on the bell and activate notifications, okay? So this talk will discuss about language, education, sexualities, genders, and intersection. To do this, let me invite our moderators. Samara Braga Jorge moves through life as a teacher, a mother, and a learner. With a degree in languages at a CELTA certification, CELTA certification, she is now completing a master's at the University of São Paulo, where she studies the contribution of art in language education. Her work is guided by a Freudian's belief that education is an act of liberation, helping us to see the world with new, open eyes. In her classroom, language becomes a bride across generation and experiences, empathy and discovery. At home, with her children, with her child is just one, and her cherished pets, she finds daily remember of curiosity and kindness. Samara believes deeply in education's power to shape a more justice, meaningful world. Hello, Samara, welcome.
Hi, Michele. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So, Lucas Rigonato, join us. Lucas spent most of his early years in Goiás with a short time in Rio Grande do Norte and has been figuring out big city life in São Paulo for nearly a decade now. An English teacher at PhD students, Lucas is deeply curious about how society shapes us, often through marks we don't realize we are carrying. His autoethnography dives into how gender, sexuality, faith, and family expectations intersect and leave their traces on our bodies and identities. For him, exploring this intersection is a decolonial act, a way to reclaim his story from the narratives imposed on him. With his loyal sidekick, Manuel, by his side, Lucas is always questioning, reflecting, and trying to balance his inner coach potato with a bit of exercise. Above all, Lucas believes that understanding these marks is essential to reclaim his own body and path as a gay man who is, besides many things, an English teacher and a researcher. Welcome, Lucas.
Thank you, Michele. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon.
And Gabriel Henrique Grotto has a degree in languages and literature from the University of São Paulo. He is currently carrying out autoethnography research in issues concerning gender and sexuality in the school contexts, drawing on insights from queer theory, literacy studies, and applied linguistics. A country boy in the big city, he enjoys reading, taking care of his dogs, and singing as an amateur. Hello, Gabriel.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with researchers I look up to.
Thank you. Thank you all. And now let's invite our speakers. Daniel Ferraz. Daniel Ferraz is the creator of GEELLE and a professor at the University of São Paulo. In addition, he is the father of Zeca and João and brother of Danilo, who is a wonderful musician. Nowadays, he studies gastronomy, philosophy, and psychoanalysis as hobbies, just as hobbies, Daniel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michele. It's a pleasure to speak.
Now it's your time.
I will explain this in a bit, what happened, but thank you very much.
And Fabio Bezerra. Fabio Bezerra is a researcher and professor from Paraíba, whose life is defined by curiosity and deep connection with the world around him. Married to George for over 12 years, he is the proud parent of Tobias, a nearly 8-year-old French bulldog, and Manu, a lovely little dog, a mix of pincher and dachshund. Fabio brings the same passion for diversity and inclusion that defines his professional work into his professional life, especially amongst his closest friends. A lover of travel, TV shows, literature, coffee, and Asian cuisine, especially Thai and Japanese, he finds inspiration in everyday experiences. Holding a doctorate in English and Applied Linguistics from the Federal University of Santa Catarina and a PhD in Linguistics from the University of Sydney, Fabio also completed a postdoctoral degree in sociology at the Federal University of Paraíba, where he is an associated professor and leads the researcher group GEPLAN. Taught his work, Fabio aims to foster dialogues between languages, cultures, and knowledge systems, promoting social justice and decolonial thoughts, with a focus on LGBTQIA+ issues, emphasizing how language can be a powerful tool in transformation and resistance. Thank you, Fabio.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank you. I'm very humbled and honored with this invitation. So, very happy to be with you all.
Thank you. I will go back to the backstage. Have a nice talk. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mi. Bye. Okay. So welcome everyone to our second session. It's a pleasure to be here. And well, in GEELLE, we normally discuss language education, as everybody is aware. If you're not aware, that's what we discuss. And our goal today is to create a space for open exchange. So we are not here to learn about the speaker's projects, but also reflect on how these intersections shape our practice as educators and as well as researchers. So our guests, Dr. Fabio Bezerra from Universidade Federal da Paraíba and Dr. Daniel Ferraz from Universidade de São Paulo. So both of whom investigate and challenge norms and practices within language education. As I said, it's an honor to moderate this conversation and to also share some of my own reflections alongside them. So please, Daniel and Fabio, if you would like to start sharing about your research, your projects, your recent, I don't know, can you tell us a little bit about what you have been doing recently?
Yes. So let me just explain what we've been doing. I will start, guys, with the same things we did in the morning and yesterday. So I will start with a couple of images. I have 3, I guess, and I will try to problematize them like a warm-up. And then Professor Fabio Bezerra will do the same. And then we will invite you, the moderators, back. I'm sorry for my puppies. Zequinha, vai deitar. Sorry. So we will ask you back, ask you to return to, so that you can ask us the GEELLE questions. And of course, we invite everybody to please join us with comments and questions, right, Fabio? So let me start with mine part. And oh, Zequinha, you are. Oh, filho, vai. Well, so Michele, do you guys have my images? I guess so. Right. Yes. Right. So in a second, can you put me back to, because I'd like to say a few words. Yes. Thank you. Okay. So it's my turn to say thank you. Right. Thank you for everybody in the chat. People from all over Brazil. really, it has been an amazing experience, this first seminar. It is, of course, a continuation of the project that we've designed for 2 years now. This dialogues and non-dialogues amongst languages, university, and societies. It is our project to approach languages, language education, language teacher education in transdisciplinary ways. And so it has been an amazing experience to share all these conversations with you. Let me just explain what I am doing here along with Professor Bezerra. And I would like to thank Fabio, not only for the partnerships, for the friendships, but Fabio accepted our invitation to talk to everybody about the topics of this session. It was supposed to be 3 Canadian friends who are in Campo Grande now, and then 2 weeks before the event, and then I thought, and then I thought about Fabio, and then I thought, well, nothing happens by chance in life. I think GEELLE maybe could add these topics into the conversation, and I'm happy that it happened this way. So this is why I decided to join Fabio, and maybe I'm here more to listen to him because I consider him a specialist in this topic. So today we are talking about language education and intersections of gender sexualities, especially focused on non-heteronormative and non-heterosexual existences, which are the non-hegemonic ones. So I'm talking about every letter of the LGBTQAI plus or PN plus from the acronym. Okay, and once again, I'm very happy. I'm happy we can talk about this in transdisciplinary ways. Like Professor Fabio Bezerra in his bio, he's just mentioned he did his postdoctorate on sociology. So perhaps the invitation here is for us to really expand, not ignore, not neglect, not eliminate what has been the grounding disciplines and the grounding knowledge that a student of languages, foreign languages, mother language, need to be a future teacher. But I think it's really important to expand, and we have the whole world to explore. We have sister disciplines to help us do that, like sociology, but also queer theories and cultural studies. And I don't know, nowadays I even think it's an ethical responsibility for us to do that, because society changes. We have different kinds of students. We have difference in the classroom. We have diversity in the classroom, not only in teacher education context, not only in language education context, but also in life. We're preparing future language teachers for this diversity of genders, sexualities, races, socioeconomic status and livings and experiences or not. So this is something that I've been interested, and this is something that GEELLE has, tried to do, to expand and trying to have more dialogues with any possible areas. We know the risk of doing this, but we are very happy with this decision so far. So I'd like you, Michele, to show my images, please. And so this is what we have done since yesterday. We are not presenting texts, let's say, even though this is a slide of a PowerPoint, you see 3 images. And so this was our proposal as well, that we had a more dialogical, a more dialogue-like event. So if you go back to our channel and you see and you watch every live that we have had so far, you will see this very dialogical, this very conversation, and hopefully this will reach more people, not only academics, but people that need this knowledge, or they are craving, they're willing to know all of this knowledge. So my image is to start the conversation. So we asked every speaker to choose images. So I did my homework as well. And then after these warm up, this introductory talk, or the provocations that Fabio and I are making, we will welcome GEELLE questions along with the moderators. And then please also ask us questions. Yes, keep the image, just very talkative. Yeah, thank you. So my first image here to your left, hopefully, it's lares homoafetivos saltam de 60.000 para 391.000 em 12 anos, mostra o censo. So translating for those who do not speak Brazilian Portuguese, and once again, thank you all the audience and collaborators from abroad. I know we have people from Portugal, and thank you very much. So, and other countries. So homoaffective homes, in Brazil, I don't know this word, but it used to be 60,000 homoaffective homes 12 years ago, and now the census shows this number of almost 400,000 homoaffective homes. And this is something that, at least for me, is it's something celebratory. We should celebrate. I don't know if you agree with me, because if we think about 10 or 20 or maybe 30 years ago, and here I'm focusing on language education or language teacher education, the topic of this session, of this live, it wouldn't even be possible. So when I started my career 30 years ago, I never, as a gay person, as a gay professor, as a gay teacher, I never thought this would be possible nowadays. Because back in time, it was much more difficult to have access to this conversation, or at least, of course, this conversation existed already, but not in language education. At least this is my experience. And it didn't happen definitely in language teacher education. If you saw Valkyria Montemor's and Clarissa Jordan's talk yesterday, they really talked about this idea that back in time, we just had this idea of training. We used to train English teachers or French or Spanish or Portuguese teachers to be teachers, to apply methods and methodologies. So, and nowadays, look, we need, at least I think we need to celebrate the fact that we are talking about much more than training. We are talking about education. It's an educational process that involves much more than training people to repeat a language, then memorize a certain language. And then the second image, this was very polemic, because I don't know about my time, Michelle, but yeah, I'll try to go faster because we're willing to listen to Professor Bezerra as well. The second image I used in my postgrad course, I'm teaching a postgrad course on non-hegemonic, non-heteronormative, non-heterosexual bodies, genders, and sexualities. Now here at the University of São Paulo, we're about to conclude the course, but this was one of the images, and Gabriel and Lucas and Samara, the three of them are doing this course. And it's been such a privilege for me, and it's a privilege to have the three of them along with us today to discuss things that they are studying as well. And this was very interesting because, I mean, we had lots of different interpretations about this image in the class. I brought the idea that I'm also celebrating the fact that at least there is some kind of recognition. And then some students said, well, let's problematize this a little bit more, because is it recognition, or is it showing just for showing? This idea that, okay, we are friendly, but when we need to pass the bills, to pass the laws, they never pass when they are abusing laws in favor of LGBTQIA plus communities. So that was very interesting to see the different interpretations of this image. So I invite you all to interpret this image here in the chat box, right? And so again, here for me, the second image in the middle, I mean, celebrating a little bit of recognition, but let's see what you guys think. As I told you, we of course, we can have different interpretations of this image. As you know, these are from Brasilia, the Congress and the Justice Palace, if I'm not mistaken, right? And then the third one is, again, within this idea of celebrating, I mean, really minor achievements. And here this is my job today, because as I told you, I was a teacher. I started my career back in the 90s. And again, not only as a teacher, but as a citizen, we didn't have such a thing that I'm showing you in the third image. So if you can see, this is a gender neutral toilets with cubicles. So you see this, and you see this a lot in Brazil nowadays as well. And also, especially in some universities, but also in different contexts. You see this a lot in pubs nowadays. So why am I celebrating these very minor achievements? Because as I said, when you compare to 3 decades ago, unfortunately, in my education, to be prepared to be an English teacher, these images were not even possible. So I invite you to celebrate with me these minor achievements. We still have, if we are, right, those who are from the LGBT communities or not, right? It doesn't matter. But if you respect the existence of these bodies, of us, right? We still have a lot to do. We know that this country is quite complex. We know that there are political, religious forces that are vectors that come right straight to us, trying to eliminate us, trying to consider us non-humans, abjects, subhumans, sick people. And I think it's our job to not only fight against this, but also it's our job to educate the population, listen to us, right, as well, because it's I think it's quite dangerous when you just have a monovision of a community, of a people, right? So this is what I wanted to start with. I don't have any provocations, but I have this invitation for us to start talking about this. It would be very, very nice if you ask us questions, if you share your stories in the chat, if you share your narratives, because this is a very important session with very important topics. Not only for language education, for teacher education, but I think that for every Brazilian citizen. Okay, thank you very much. And I invite Fabio to start his provocations. Thank you.
Hi, everyone, again. First of all, I'd like to say that I'm thrilled to be here with you all to talk about issues that are so relevant and dear to me. So, to start my introduction, I'd like to share with you the reading of the poem I don't know if you know it, but I think it connects beautifully with what we are discussing here today. A Litany for Survival by Audre Lorde. And the reading is done by the poet herself. I found this video on YouTube and I'm going to share it with you. Audre Lorde, for those of you who don't know it, is a self described Black lesbian mother warrior poet from the US. So if we could share the
Bible
poem now, the
number
video.
42. Actually, the title of this poem, as I always like to announce, is A Litany for Survival number 42. Only so that we should keep in our consciousness the fact that survival is not a one-time decision. It's not a one-time act. It's something that goes on and on and on. And you make a commitment in the same way I make a commitment to myself. I make a commitment to my working. I make a commitment to my survival and to being able to see it wherever it occurs. A litany for survival. For those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone, for those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of choice, who love in doorways coming and going in the hours between dawn, looking inward and outward at once, before and after, seeking a now that can breed futures like bread in our children's mouths, so their dreams will not reflect the deaths of ours. For those of us who were imprinted with fear like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk, for by this weapon, this illusion of some safety to be found, the heavy-footed hoped to silence us. For all of us, this instant and this triumph, we were never meant to survive. So when the sun rises, we are afraid it might not remain. When the sun sets, we are afraid it might not rise in the morning. When our stomachs are full, we are afraid of indigestion. When our stomachs are empty, we are afraid we may never eat again. And when we are loved, we are afraid love will vanish. When we are alone, we are afraid love will never return. And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So, it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive.
Well, that's it. Thank you very much. I don't know you guys, but for me, this poem is a very strong one. I think it connects beautifully with our discussion. And as I see it, the poem, it describes constant fear that marginalized people feel in the face of life's uncertainties and oppression. So, but then she said, rather than being paralyzed by these fears, the poet encourages us to resist and live fully, despite the threats. The poet also suggests that while fear is a part of the existence of those on the so-called margins, the true act of survival lies in refusing to be silenced and in claiming one's own voice and space. Okay? So this is why I believe that this would be a nice introduction for our discussion. Those of us, and I speak as a gay man from Northeast of Brazil, and looking back, I certainly can remember instances of life where I thought I would not survive. because I was who I was. And it is partly, but importantly, due to the powerful social movements that organized those marginalized people into action. It is because of them that I am here and then I can be talking to you about this. So I would also like to acknowledge my ancestry, people who came before me, so that it would be allowed, legal, for me to be who I am here talking to you, right? So I think this is, from the get-go, is something that needs to be said and acknowledged. If you could please share the first image, I'd appreciate it. So the image you see here, guys, is of a recent experience I had at USP. You may see some familiar faces here during a time that I had away from work, a leave for research. I carried out this research alongside Danielle and Ana Paula at USP. And the main result of this research and this cooperation was the creation of this outreach course or extension course, language and diversity, that was delivered this past month, right? So it was beautiful, powerful, life impacting experience for me, and I'm sure for those attending as well, because I was lucky to receive lots of feedback from them. Here, I just selected a few images from that time in São Paulo. As you can see on the top left side, for those of you, maybe some of you will recognize this. This is, I was exactly at the bus stop in front of the Faculty of Education. And I remembered this, I included this image here because I remembered the definition of Kimberly Crenshaw for intersectionality, thinking of avenues of oppression and of challenges that marginalized people have to face every day. And intersection would be the crisscrossing of those avenues. And per specific experiences in society are definitely impacted by the intersections of our social identity differences. So this is certainly one. This was certainly one of the main elements we discussed in the course. So you see here some photos with Danielle and Ana Paula, because I would like to acknowledge that equally as important as it is being able to talk about theory and having a methodologically sound and theoretically based course, it is equally important to focus on the emotions and the effects that we create. So these two are very dear friends. And as you can see also in another picture is a picture of part of the group that took part in this course. And the other images also remind us that diversity exists in places where we usually do not think they would exist. For example, among indigenous peoples, among quilombolas. So I think it's important that we widen our perspectives to understand the experience of differences in our society. And the last one on the right, far right side is myself in the classroom, which is one of my favorite places to be. So yeah, I think that this is what I wanted to say in the very beginning. So I will give you back the floor now, and I will continue later. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Fabio. Thank you, Professor Daniel. Well, I have many things going on in my mind right now, especially because of the things Daniel brought. Yes, and also Fabio. I had the honor to be a student of both of you, both Fabio and Daniel. I had the chance to take one of the classes of Fabio's course that he just presented. And also, I am a student of Daniel, yes. I'm not saying that he's also my advisor, but anyways. And thinking about all these things, as Daniel brought, it's a recent thing for language education to not only teach our students to communicate in English, but also help them think about the world and expand their visions. Yes, how important it is and how great our job is when we include criticality, when we include these literacies. So thinking about all these things, I remember the day we discussed these little steps we are having in society with this acceptance, yes, but is this acceptance enough for what we are fighting for this discussion? So thinking about this course Fabio just presented, which was great. Thank you very much for this course. Thank you also, Daniel, for these ideas you have been bringing. I would like to ask you about the researches, the projects you have been doing. Could you guys please share with us, please?
Would you like to go first, Daniel?
I think you can go first. Yeah.
Okay. Well, how can I summarize this? I'll try. I'll give it a go. My recent research has primarily focused on exploring the intersections of gender, sexuality, and language in the media and in educational contexts, particularly in relation to LGBTQIA plus issues in Brazil. So basically, this is the main focus of my research. One key project involves analyzing how cosmovisions and epistemologies of indigenous and quilombola peoples can be articulated within the discussion and advancement of gender and sexuality studies in Brazil in a decolonial and intersectional perspective. So I think that's it.
And I will join.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So I think what I've focused, I mean, my entire life at least for the past 30 years, let's say, is language teacher education. At least for me, that's what connects everything. I even told Ana Paula, you saw a picture of Fabio and Ana. So, well, I should be working there with you, right? Because it's my main focus. I mean, education is what, let's say, it's what I'm always worried about. And more specifically, teacher education and language teacher education. So from this starting point, let's say, what I've tried to do from time to time is to approach this, as I told you, in a more inter-transdisciplinary way. So what I'm doing right now, I am kind of making a pause, let's say, in my literacy studies, things that I've done, that I did for a long time, at least a decade, let's say, literacies, multiliteracies, even though I do have supervisees who are doing lots of digital literacies research, etc. So I don't know if you agree with me, Fabio, but with our supervisees, we keep studying. Yeah, we keep working and reading along with them. So what I'm doing now is, along with Fabio, we will probably have a chance to talk about our research/study group that we've just started. But I'm also interested in the intersections of genders, sexualities, class, economic class, race, in language teacher education. So this is what I'm doing right now, even though I'm also working a lot with something that I started 4 years ago, that is the philosophy of language and philosophy of education. So I think they connect to a certain extent, because we need philosophy to understand society. So basically, philosophy of education and languages, and gender, sexualities, and intersections, focused on non-hegemonic existences. So this is what I've been doing. Now, in terms of writing, this is something nice to say here. Well, the way I'm trying to approach some of my texts and some of my publications and some of my events and conversations is to try to not to translate, but also try to do something that is, whenever possible, something that at least mixes formal academic writing and genre, etc., with something more informal. So this is something that I've tried to do with many of my texts, knowing about the risk of being rejected. I mean, I know all about that, but whenever possible, for example, using Ana Paula Dubois' gaps or cracks in this attitude. So if it's a chapter, let's say somebody invites me, I ask the editor, could I write something more of a mix of formal and informal? And my idea here is to try to translate what we do in universities, what we do in academia, into something that could be for academics, but not only. So this is what I've tried to do in terms of writing and how I'm translating the research projects that I have carried out recently. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Fabio. Thank you, Professor Daniel. Gabriel, what about you? Would like to join us in the conversation? You're so quiet there.
I think Lucas has a follow-up question, doesn't he? Before.
I do, but feel free. Gabriel, do you want me to go?
Yes.
Sure. I share with Samara the privilege of having attended both courses, the one by Danielle and the one by Professor Fabio as well, the first day. And I remember the day that Danielle showed that image to us, those images, actually, the ones with the public buildings being lit up with the colors of the rainbow, right? And Danielle mentioned that it is a celebration, and it kept us thinking what we are celebrating. Is it a marketing stunt or a reality in our everyday lives? Because if you live within the spectrum of the LGBT acronyms, you will know that we suffer violences, small violences and big violences every day. And depending on what your body is, the color of your skin, the gender you present, and the way you behave, society will allow you to exist or not, with the liberties that you have. And connecting to Professor Fabio's choice of poem, the lines that stay with me is, we were never meant to survive. We are afraid, and she continues with, we are afraid of several things, but in a nutshell, we are afraid of existing, right? The images that you presented and the projects that you've just shared, that you're doing a lot. You're doing plenty. I work closely with Professor Daniel, and I know that he does a lot in the projects of research, and I see how personal life and work are connected in what you do, because you both mentioned that you are within the LGBT acronym as well. I myself am involved in autoethnography, in which I also bring myself to the work, and I'm curious to know how you both think personal experiences and identity shape your projects, shape what you do.
Oh, that's a very good question, Lucas. Thank you. Um, well, first of all, just to begin, they certainly do. Um, One issue that I addressed in the course I taught you guys was the invention of the division between mind and body, right? An invention that happened in um, early Greece with the classics and continued up to the last centuries. More recently, not recently, but thinking about the whole of history, yes, more recently with Descartes. So the idea that the only type of knowledge that merits sharing and developing is the work of the mind. So our body and our emotions have been historically ripped out of any type of expression in the academia, for example. So it is not a surprise for me when I see coworkers and friends, colleagues who are in the academia as well, who struggle with bringing themselves into their research, because it's only obvious that this will generally be the case, having that difficulty. And I myself can say that I also struggle because I cannot say that I live outside of the logics of academia. I also have to deal with it. And but my choice, my personal choice of having to deal with the constraints and the potentials of academia is a choice of resistance. So I do not accept the limitations that are imposed to me. At the same time, I also acknowledge that I speak from a place of privilege. So I can make the choices I make because of certain intersections of my of certain aspects of my social identity. I'm a white man. I'm a man. So I know that historically this um, has placed more rights towards us for being men, for example, and for being white in academia. But at the same time, I'm from the northeast of Brazil. That we all know the social imaginary that there is about northeast and the north of Brazil as being less than, right? So I also have to struggle with this to find the places where I can speak, and when I cannot find them, I will have to create them. Um, and as a gay man, the same. My choice of focus of study, this is not what I have studied with in my academic career. I have always worked with the representations of identities, but I initially focused on the representations of women in the media. It was only a while after that I decided to focus on to bring more of my experience into the research that I carried out. So it is a challenge, but it is the only challenge that I accept. There is no other choice for me. If academia wouldn't allow me to be who I am and research what I want to research, I wouldn't be there. So, but that's my personal experience, right? Thank you for the question, Lucas.
Yeah, I think this is a very important question, Lucas. This this because as you all know, even in language studies, estudos de linguagem, we do have a historical perspective, let's say, that is mostly, I mean, borrowed from other sciences, right? This is a possible view. What I mean by that is, for example, separating the subject and the object. So I go into a classroom and I am a neutral observer, and then I collect data from a setting and I analyze that as if the relationship, and this is philosophy, as if the relationship between the subject and object, and terrible to call human beings object, but this is how science does. There's a subject. As if this were separated, as if this were even possible to be separated. So we have this historical perspective in which, and this is why in language studies, we learned, at least from our generation, Fabio and I, we learned to write in the scientific third person. So this is the proof that language studies, right? Estudos de linguagem, nesse caso, they are scientific. We write in third person. They said, they acknowledged, they. So as if you, the scientist, right? And I think this has changed a lot, even in undergraduate contexts. Of course, again, I'm trying to be very careful with dichotomies here, like say, oh, this doesn't exist anymore. I think there's possibility for coexistence, in my view. And I think that more recent studies, let's say, are trying to show that, first of all, especially from cultural studies, Clifford Geertz and Stuart Hall, it's difficult. I mean, it's impossible to separate the researcher and the object and the people. First of all, you were doing it. So it's either you position yourself or you keep the illusion that you are a neutral observer. And then ethnography was very helpful in that sense. And educational ethnography, classroom ethnography, they were very helpful because ethnography is based on observation. At the same time, it's a participatory observation. So the researcher is always there, implied in the setting, in the context, changing the context because of their presence. And then even more recently, autoethnography has insisted on this idea that language, sciences of language, any language actually, even they're constructed by somebody or a team, therefore they are subjective. So the way I see this is like, so what I've been trying to do is to acknowledge this. So for many years now, for more than 2 decades, I've worked with ethnography and educational ethnography because it makes sense to me. It tries to a certain extent, not to break this, but at least to question and to bring the researcher and into the context, right? Now here, if I may, I think it has to do with Tiziani's, right? How can we address this in our text if we are LGBT? Yeah, our bodies and identities, and how can we exclude, right? Tiziani, who's also doing this course that I'm about to conclude here at USP. And then TV, I forgot her first name, but it's a she. Speaking from a place, I can't help but notice the majority of male scholars on this panel about intersectionality and gender. What are the other letters, right? The other bodies. I agree with you guys. It's very, very I think it's an emergent field. I mean, this connection of cultural studies, genders, queer theory, and languages. This is my first comment. But I do agree with you that it should always be worrisome when we don't have diversity, including the matos, the hierarchies within these letters. We know that, as Fabio said, the gay male, if white, will be the G, and then comes the L, and then the T. So we know about all of these complex relations within the communities as well. But I would answer both of you by saying that it's not. I think that if you're LGBT, Tiziani, for me, the way I see it nowadays, it should be an ethical responsibility not to move away from this identity when we're teaching, at least, or when we are doing research. Or, we should at least be interested in getting more knowledge so that we can deal with this very complex Brazilian society that we have, especially in relation to discourses about us. At the same time, I do think that's everybody's responsibility. I mean, it's not acceptance, as Samara said. It's, I mean, it has to do with existence. We all inhabit this planet and this cosmos. So for me, it should be something that, even though we are considered minorities in every context, in every nation state, it should be everybody's responsibility, to discuss, to know more, to learn more, so that you can think for yourself. Don't think about what you received from WhatsApp and then, I believe that. No, think for yourself. Talk to somebody. Get knowledge, be knowledgeable. This is a very important invitation, right? So I do think that it's a responsibility, an ethical responsibility from people in the communities, but I do think it's everybody's responsibility. I'm sorry.
I'd like to add something, if I may. I think Tiziani brought up a very important and relevant issue as far as gender and equity goes, and I'd also add sexuality goes. But I think we should also be mindful of not running into the danger of overanalyzing all situations. Because if I remember well, for example, I participated as audience in yesterday's afternoon panel, and it was an all women panel. So there is room for everybody, but I certainly understand the expectation of seeing this forum here and seeing more equity, basically. But sometimes that's not the case. I just have to think that we have to look at the bigger picture. And I say this is the only aspect I'd like to add. Thank you.
All right. So moving on to the second provocation. In your book, Fabio, Linguística Aplicada Transviada, you introduce your theory as this decolonial and intersectional perspective, which, according to you, allows us to go beyond the questioning of the gender binary. We should also understand, for example, why certain bodies are regarded as abject, dehumanized, undesirable, and what role language and discourse play in invisibilizing those violences or making them sound normal, which is common in Brazil nowadays, right? And I understand that the term queer is problematic here because it does not resonate much with many people outside the academia. with teachers, for example, who have to tackle these topics in the classroom. So I'd like to hear from you. How can this alternative that you were suggesting, like this cultural translation from queer to transviada theory, how can it help us language teachers tackle gender and sexuality in the classroom? Also, how can it foster the dialogue between universities, languages, and society? Should they dialogue in the first place? In which way? Can you give us examples?
Wow. I will certainly give it a try. To begin with your questioning about the translation of queer into transviada, I think the first thing that I have to say, as I always say when I address this issue, I follow the translation suggested by a sociologist, a Brazilian sociologist, Berenice Bento, from Paraíba, but nowadays she's a professor at UNB. And having had contact with her writings for over a decade before writing that book I published last year, I always connected with the discussion that she was trying to bring, because I will not speak too much about this because it will require more time, but I'll try to do it very briefly, just to pinpoint one big difference between the use of queer in the US, for example, and the use of queer in Brazil. In the US, the term queer was resignified from the social movements, and then it reached academia. So it was exactly the opposite that happened in Brazil. The term has been imported by academicists and not translated and kept in English. And it is not in the social movements, usually. Of course, if you are a person in the academia who also participates in the social movements, then yes, it may be there, but usually it isn't. So only this difference. There are other arguments, but only this one, I think, poses a very important aspect of the discussion. In a decolonial perspective, I think it's very important that we revisit the language we speak, the languages we speak in our culture. The choice of transviada is not only because I want to use a term in Portuguese, but it has a history in our country, a history that refers to people that have been historically marginalized, rejected from society, from the system, from heteronormativity. And it goes beyond that. It also referred to the youth that resisted dictatorship, to the youth that wished for a different type of life that allowed them to be themselves. So hippies in Brazil, for example, used to be called in the 60s and 70s transviado, juventude transviada. So it is a term that resonates with our history. So when I'm addressing the marginalized people in terms of sexuality, gender, race, social class, there is this very potent term in our language. Why not use it? There is an Italian researcher, Caterina Rai. She teaches at Unilab here in Brazil. She lives in Brazil. And she published a chapter in the book organized by Heloísa Bloch de Holanda, Sexualities in the Global South. And she reminds us of the importance of being aware of the travelings of the term queer. And this obviously has to do with what I have just mentioned to you. It is not okay to just use the term queer as used in the US or in other northern countries. In Brazil and in Latin America, we have to resignify it. And one of the ways of doing that very explicitly is by using our language. And in response to your second question, about this connection, right, between languages and universities and societies. That is a very complex question, which I'm not going to even try to cover in my answer. But I can say a few things very briefly. Um, I can say that in my context where I work, there is an ongoing, but I have to say, often underexplored dialogue between language, universities, and society. I think we could say that universities, at least they are seen as spaces that ideally reflect the diversity of society, right? But this is not always the case, particularly with when it comes to issues of race, gender, sexuality. For example, language education in Brazil has been traditionally rooted in colonial, Eurocentric perspectives, which does not adequately address the linguistic and cultural diversity of our society. So I think it is essential that universities not only teach language, but also engage with social issues to help students critically examine how language can both uh, perpetuate and challenge societal inequalities. Right. So in my work, for instance, I've been pushing for curriculum changes in my university that incorporate these dialogues, and I believe can encourage future educators to become agents of change. I think. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I've read recently about these travelings about the word, this travelings of the word queer throughout the world. I've read the works of Larissa Pelucio. She's a researcher at Unesp, and you know, it's nice that you addressed it. I totally agree. I just posed the question because I wanted this to be discussed. Thank you.
And just to add, Larissa Pelusi, she is strongly influenced by Berenice Bento. So, yeah, it makes sense that you noticed that.
Yeah, and you cite Berenice Bento in your book to justify why you are using transviado. You say, I'm borrowing this. So.
Well, I'm not sure Danielle wants to touch on that. No, so I can go ahead. We're sort of approaching the end of this talk already, which is surprising because we could stay here much longer. I will pose one more question by Gelli to both of you. We've been talking about intersection. I learned a lot more about the concept of intersection in your course, Professor Fabio. So I'm very grateful to that, and I was happy to learn that it is born from a woman, right? Which makes a lot of sense. These conversations, the very fact that we're having a conversation about topics which are deemed subjective, therefore should be outside of academia, is resistance already. I don't know if someone here, if you have seen a few weeks ago, it was all over the news, the fact that there was some conference happening in Maranhão, if I'm not mistaken, on diversity, and there was, if I'm not mistaken, a travesti giving a lecture about the topic, and this conversation was, I would say, hijacked by the mainstream media, and they started showing it on TV and heavily criticizing it with the question, so this is what our money, this is what the public money is being spent on. I don't know if you saw that, if people in the audience saw that. So again, the very fact that we're here and that we're exposing ourselves to social scrutiny and to social torture, if we allow them to, is resistance, right? And the intersections that we all live in our own individual lives, they play a role in shaping who we are, how we see the world, what we are afraid of, how we are afraid of that which we desire. I think as an LGBT person, I'll have to forever question my own homophobia, my fear of being damned by a Christian God that is watching what I do with my body, and he's very interested in what I do with my body. So much so that I may spend the rest of eternity burning in hell. Because this is what I've been taught. So the fact that we bring this conversation and we use every word to describe our fear is resistance. That was not a question, that was a comment. I'll move on to the question. To both of you, how do you see the importance and presence of the intersections of gender, sexuality, race, and class, both in language education and in teacher education? And I know you've mentioned it already. Obviously, Fabio was just tackled that, touched on that. But if you can give us examples, we'll appreciate it.
Would you like to go first now?
Yes, I can do that. Thank you. Well, it's a very important question once again. Such a pity we are about to finish our conversation. So I'll try to be fast so that we can listen to Fabio. If my dog allows me to, because now he decided to. Yeah, thank you. João, please. So I think, Lucas, it is almost impossible to separate them. And this is the way I see intersectionality. It is calling our attention to, even though there is critique, especially from Richardson and Monroe, the ones that I've been reading, they highly, and also Poir, they highly criticize some intersectionality studies for not even considering, but also not consistently problematizing the queer identities or the transviadas identities, let's say. But at the same time, I still think it's very productive because it calls our attention to something very important. I mean, it's impossible to separate from the category, everything that we're doing from the category of socioeconomic class in a very, very, country like ours. So the fact that we are all having the opportunity to discuss what we're doing in the English language because we are English teachers, but also because we would like to provide a more international dialogue is also a privilege, and it comes from the possibilities that this is feasible. This is just happening because of certain socioeconomic, because we had the chance to do it, to learn this language, and etc. So I keep thinking about this category, this part of class, not only when I talk about gender, non-hegemonic genders and sexualities, but also when I'm teaching, when I'm doing research, because I think that is something that we sometimes forget. Neoliberalism is out there, and it has been it has been presented as something really, really good. I mean, it's something good to have a neoliberal economy. It's something good to have a neoliberal education. And I cannot believe when I listen to such discourses. I mean, I get shocked because has this person at least tried to understand the consequences of a neoliberal education? Have we thought about these differences and privileges, and have we problematized all this along with our students? Have we mentioned this in our research project? So this is something that I really think about. I think class is something that many of us in applied linguistics are worried about, are doing this, but it should be something that, you know, belong to every study, I think, once again. I mean, not only in humanities, but it's especially in Brazil, with this country with social differences, economic differences, but class differences that are really unimaginable. I mean, it's such a shame for us to have historically built a society like this. There is data, people. I'm not inventing. 1% of the richness, the capital, the money in this country, I mean, they possess the other 99% of richness of this country. And so the 99% are medium class, socioeconomic class, or below. And this is serious, right? So, well, well, something I'd like to share, my thoughts, my provocations.
Thank you, Professor. I don't know if Fabio would like to comment something else.
I will, very briefly.
Okay,
Yes,
sure,
very
please.
briefly. I just wanted to highlight, I think, an important aspect as we're discussing decoloniality and history. We've been talking a lot about intersectionality, and we mentioned, I mentioned Kimberly Crenshaw, because she was the one who coined the term in the late 80s, early 90s. But I think it's very important to acknowledge our history. The discussions of the intersections between race, gender, and social class have happened for quite a while before the discussions proposed by Kimberly Crenshaw, carried out by Lélia Gonzalez, Beatriz Nascimento, for example, Abdias Nascimento, Sueli Carneiro, Conceição Evaristo, Franz Fanon. I'm trying to remember important names. Djamila Ribeiro, Carla Cotirene, Grada Quilomba, Bell Hooks, Patricia Hill Collins. So all these names bring forward the discussion of intersectionality, right? And it is very important, I think, that we acknowledge our history, because we have to take pride in our history. It is not, no wonder very few people know this in Brazil. It's because they were Black and women. People only got to know more widely Lélia Gonzalez because of Angela Davis. So this is a very clear, specific example of how colonial discourse blinds us to our history and forbids us, gets in the way of us taking pride in our history, in things that we should be taking pride in. So I think acknowledging the work of Lélia Gonzalez, Beatriz Nascimento, and other Black women who came before Kimberly Crenshaw is also very important, especially for Brazilians talking about this issue. Right? I would have more, but I'll give you the floor now, and maybe I'll continue later on.
Thank you, Professor Fabio, for your contribution. It was like a great way to end this conversation we're having. Thank you. And I also would like to mention that we teachers who are at the school, at the public education, trying to not only discuss all these important issues of our society in academia, but also with our students, with our teenagers, with our kids. This is what is going to change the future. And I'm very happy to share the comment of Adriana Capuchinho. She mentioned here in the chat that her son studied different family constitutions in English classes in a public school. So there were homoaffective families, and she felt that it was great. And I see that the teacher, the English teacher who was doing this job, is putting herself at risk, because everybody here understands the political situation we face in Brazil, especially, and how difficult sometimes it is for us, but even though we know we may face these difficulties, we should not just give up of changing the world for the society we want for the future, for our kids, for the kids of the future. And well, I was very happy to read the comment of Adriana Cappuccino. And well, now to wrap our discussions, we have some great questions on the chat that I would like to ask you to help me answering them. So the first question I have here from Ticiane is, why do gender and sexuality issues seem to be the first enemies of conservatism? And she continues asking, if we are LGBT but not research in the area, how can we address this in our texts, our bodies and identities? I think we have mentioned a little bit of how we involve ourselves in our research, but I would like to invite you to contribute to these questions.
Maybe so that we can talk about both. Maybe I can start with the first one, done, and you go on with the second question.
Okay.
Okay. All right. It's the question about why issues of sexuality and gender, for instance, are so much opposed by conservatism, right? Um, there are a number of reasons. I can mention a few. One of them is actually traditional morality. So conservatism often emphasizes traditional values, including norms around family and sexuality that align with historical or religious views of heterosexual marriage and procreation. And there is a clear connection between um, understanding family for procreation with the perpetuation of neoliberalism, of capitalism as a whole, right? So this is one important reason. As I mentioned, religious beliefs, many conservative ideologies are rooted in religious teachings that advocate for specific sexual behaviors and oppose others. So there is the element of religion as well. I think connected to the first one that I mentioned, there is the issue of social stability. So conservatives, they may argue that deviation from traditional sexual norms poses threats to social stability, which they believe is maintained through conventional family structures and procreation. There is also obviously a very strong resistance to change. So conservatism generally favors gradual change over rapid reform. So it is no wonder conservatists oppose social movements that demand social change and immediate social change. And there are others I'm gonna go, I can just mention, but not explain, like the role of gender norms, emphasis on personal responsibility, um, and alleged perception of moral decline. So all of these aspects put together alongside others that I didn't mention explain why conservatism is so much opposed to differences, most importantly to social identity differences. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you, Professor Fabio. Thank you for your contribution. Professor Daniel, would you like to complement or say something?
No, I do agree with Fabio, and I've mentioned this already. And I agree with all of us, well, maybe all of us would agree that, I mean, the context, I mean, of course, in general terms, in Brazil, it's when we talk about these topics, when we fight for more equity, for more respect, or even for more conversations on this, because when you dialogue, perhaps you can I mean, in this dialogical relationship, you can, have more educational exchange, let's say. But I do agree that things are difficult in Brazil. It's almost a risk of doing these conversations of this kind. It's not the first time, Fabio, that we're doing this conversation. We've done with other colleagues, and we want to do it more. Yeah, and trying to answer the question about the language, it finally came up why we're doing this in English. There are many reasons. The first one, we love the language. That's a first very practical answer. All of us are English teachers, and this is a research group on language education in foreign languages, focused on the English language. So this is something that we do. We teach in the language every day, and this is the reason why. Now, if you don't know GEELLE, I invite you to go back to our lives. In every cycle of talks, we had a national event, an international event. And this is why we decided to do it in English, for the sake of practice, for the sake of love for the language, for the sake of we do have international collaboration and international people watching these lives. So it's also a way to try to dialogue with diversity, okay? And we can do that in Brazilian Portuguese as well, and we can do that in English. So this would be a more practical answer. There are many others that I could bring to the fore. Unfortunately, we have to finish, because we do have COPE and BioCOPE Americalensis in 15 minutes. But I would invite Professor Fabio to say some final words, and then over to Samara. Well, I'd like to say thank you. Let me say my final words. Big thank you. I was looking at the chat, and all the contributions and all the people engaged at this time. And I thought, well, this should happen. And thank you for Fabio for joining us, because it is important to start this dialogue in any language, but it's important, for GEELLE to have had this conversation. So I'm very happy we did it. Thank you.
I'm also very glad, obviously, for the invitation and the opportunity to talk about such dear and relevant, important, pressing issues in our society. I'd like to also thank the participation of the audience, all the questions and comments. They have certainly contributed to our discussion. And finally, I'd like to thank Samara, Lucas, Gabriel, and João Paulo on the backstage for your amazing moderation of this session. Thank you very much. It was an honor.
Thank you, Professor Daniel. Thank you, Professor Fabio. Lucas, please. Gabriel, you too. Thank you for being here with me.
My pleasure. I would like to thank and appreciate you all for the courage to bring this conversation to the forth and to put in your faces, our faces in the conversation. It was really enriching. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It was my debut as a moderator.